Welcome to the History, Law, and Justice Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Buckner, a lawyer and amateur historian. I will explore with you legal issues affecting governance, society, and culture of the United States and other civilizations, both past and present, using history as my guide. Before we begin the episode, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, you're invited to share your thoughts on today's topic or anything dealing with history and the law in the comment sections below or on our social media platforms. The United States is not the first nation to engage in the endless debate regarding the regulation of weapons. What makes the American experience unique is the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Since its ratification in December of 1791, we have been debating the meaning and scope of the Second Amendment. From a macro perspective, one side interprets the amendment to provide for collective rights, while the contrasting view sees that the provision provides for individual rights. The purpose of today's episode is not to take a legal, moral, or ethical stance on the Second Amendment, or to advocate for the implementation or repeal of gun control laws. Instead, we're going to explore the laws of ancient Rome in this area. Now, yes, I know that the Romans did not have guns, but they did implement laws and edicts that regulated weapons available at that time. Think swords, daggers, clubs, and other weapons. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to review some of those laws, including the reasons behind them. A member Roman society did not possess a constitutional or enshrined right to own a weapon. In fact, inside the Pomerium, which was the religious and sacred boundary of the city of Rome, weapons of any kind were generally prohibited. The vaunted legions of the Roman army were even barred from stepping inside that boundary armed. Overall, the Romans intended to keep war outside of the city and civility inside. As Rome grew beyond its city-state boundaries and became an imperial world power, statesmen and later emperors passed new weapon control laws to 1. Address a contemporary incident or period of extreme violence, and 2. Regulate weapons in the hands of a defined class of people or within a particular region or province. Let's look at some of those laws. Rome experienced 3 major slave revolts, also called the Servile Wars, the most famous of which was the third one, led by the gladiator Spartacus. But after the second Servile War, which took place from 104 to 100 BCE on the island of Sicily, all slaves were banned from carrying weapons by Rome. It was in 81 BCE that the dictator Sulla passed a law that we had discussed earlier that banned a person, including the army, from carrying a weapon with the intent of murdering or robbing someone inside the city boundary. The weapon ban also had another purpose, which was to prevent coups. During this period, Romans relied on creative defenses to violations of these weapon control laws. For example, in 63 BCE, a Roman who was prosecuted as part of a conspiracy to overthrow the Republic defended the massive weapons found during a search of his house with the explanation that he was a collector of antique weapons. To curb an era of sustained armed violence, in 52 BCE, general and statesman Pompey the Great broke the weapon control laws when he permitted his legions to enter the city armed with the stated purpose of restoring public order. The state also implemented an absolute ban on the possession of weapons by citizens in the city. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, one of the most famous assassinations in world history occurred when dictator and general Julius Caesar was killed before a meeting of the Roman Senate. On that day, the Senate was meeting in the theater of Pompey, which was located outside of the city boundaries. The senators carried out the deed using daggers that were secretly smuggled into the meeting. An interesting little tidbit that is often left out of most accounts of the assassination is that the conspirators staged a gladiatorial event at the theater of Pompey on that day. The gladiators, which were of course armed, were provided by conspirator and senator Decimus Brutus, and were present in case the services were needed. Under Augustus, the first Roman emperor, the state only allowed the police and fire brigade, the urban army cohorts, and the Praetorian Guard, which were the elite personal bodyguards of the emperor, to carry weapons within the city. Further, persons were not permitted to carry weapons during assemblies or the hearing of law cases. To reduce robbery in Rome and throughout Italy, Augustus passed a law that restricted the carrying of weapons for purposes other than hunting or for self-defense. This law, which targeted the criminal groups that operated outside of the cities and were the source of most of the illicit activity, dramatically reduced crime. Justinian I, emperor of the East Roman, or otherwise known as Byzantine Empire, during the 6th century, compiled laws and edicts in the Code of Justinian. One of those laws noted that a person that was lawfully in possession of something has a right to use a moderate degree of force to repel any violence exerted for the purpose of taking that possession. The code also included other laws that dealt with the regulation of weapons. As you can see, a review of history shows the Romans were not strangers to the examination regarding to possession and regulation of weapons. No matter what side you fall on, I hope this brief lesson of the Roman experience will enable you to see the American gun control debate through a different perspective. You have just listened to the History, Law, and Justice podcast with your host, Michael Buckner. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode, Michael's contact information is included in the description box. Citations to sources used to prepare this episode are also listed in the description box. Finally, don't forget to click on the link to subscribe to receive the next episode of this podcast. Remember to let history serve as your roadmap for future success.